Hello and welcome again to Cherry Red TV. Today I'm with John Reed, the Director of Catalogue for Cherry Red, and we're going to talk about a new box set that's just come in called Crawling Up a Hill, A Journey Through the British Blues Boom 1966 to 1971, which has got a lot of acts on here that are really big and a lot I've just never heard of. So we have the Yardbirds, Fleetwood Mac, Spencer Davis Group, John Reed, Jeff Beck, so some really, Alexis Corner, some really big acts, and then, as I said, some I just don't know, but John will enlighten us. So tell me what the album is, John, basically.
Okay, so, brief recap on that mid-60s period. You've got the whole British beat boom, Beatles and Mersey beat and Brum beat stuff out of the Midlands. And then 64, you've got this R&B boom, which was still really spinning off the beat boom. So you've got the Rolling Stones, of course, the Animals, the Yardbirds, them, Spencer Davis Group. And a lot of them are teenagers, are in the early 20s, and they're listening to these Chuck Berry or Howlin' Wolf records. But the music they're making is still in a kind of British beat sort of style. So if you hear the Rolling Stones doing Come On or It's All Over Now, it's still essentially pop music. It's in a beat music style. And then really by in 65, you have this little watershed moment when Eric Clapton leaves the Yardbirds. They have a hit with For Your Love, which is taking them away from their blues roots, having a big pop hit written by Graham Gouldman. And Eric Clapton, who's a bit of a blues purist, says, no, I don't want this. I joined a blues band. And he leaves. It's a bit of a shock, because already Clapton's a bit of a star. And he joins a relatively, compared to the Yardbirds, unknown band, John Mayall's Blues Breakers, who were very much a blues group. And he becomes a bit of a superstar. And there's this famous picture, this graffiti, which is used on the front of Crawling Up a Hill, Clapton is God, where he's a star. And they record an album for Decca called John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and often called the Beano album, because on the front there's Eric Clapton reading the Beano. And he himself essentially makes the record a hit because he's such a star, and the record is brilliant. It's produced by Mike Vernon. It's recorded very much in the style of American blues records. Everything's redlined, so it sounds really overdriven, and no one expected it to be a smash. And what that record is essentially the birth of the British blues scene, as distinct from the sort of R&B scene that's preceded it. And so while a lot of groups in 66, 67 go off and become ever more flowery and create psychedelic music, and then eventually that evolves into progressive rock, you've got this parallel scene that is true to the original idea of the British R&B scene. And they're looking to Delta blues, they're digging into the likes of Robert Johnson and all of these very deep black American records, and then reinventing them in a kind of British blues style. It also happened in tandem with what was happening in America. You had guys like Mike Bloomfield, and there was obviously an American blues scene that was running in tandem with it, and the two informed each other. So this box set, Crawling Up a Hill, once again curated by David Wells, who runs our Grapefruit label, is an attempt to, as with the other Grapefruit box sets, document that really fecund, fertile period when the British blues scene evolves out of that John Mayall's Blues Breakers record and the Rolling Stones et al., and really enjoys this kind of boom through the psychedelic and into the progressive era. But we're really concentrating on those artists who were both at the electric end of blues, which I suppose finds its crescendo with Led Zeppelin, although we couldn't include them. Led Zeppelin are the ultimate kind of climax of that sort of evolution, because they are in essence a British blues band that evolve out of the Yardbirds. But we've also reflected another scene that was happening which more came from folk, and folk and blues obviously overlap. If you look at those Newport Blues festivals, you had folk artists and blues artists. It's kind of roots music, really. And you had labels like Sadisc cropping up in the late 60s that were really companions of folk labels like Topic, who were making these acoustic blues records. So this box set again embraces that element too.
So tell us about some of the more obscure names on here who actually have quite well-known people playing on them.
Yeah, so you've got acts like Quiet Melon. Quiet Melon was really a sort of a missing link between Small Faces when they break up in early '69 and the Faces. So I think it's the remaining Faces minus Steve Marriott, but including Art Wood, who'd been in a band called the Artwoods, and they record some tracks. Nothing happens, nothing's released, and eventually Art Wood leaves, and they get Rod Stewart in, and they become the Faces. So that's one track that's on there. You've got groups like Liverpool Scene, which are a Liverpool group, essentially, who feature Adrian Henry, who was a well-known poet and painter. And they were kind of a quirky art group, really, but they did this pastiche of British blues. Who else have we got on here? Jeremy Spencer, of course, was famous in Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
Siren featured Kevin Coyne, who became a solo star in the 70s. So it's, and Brett Marvin and the Thunderbolts included Jonah Louie, who later on was a solo star. But equally, you've got acts like Status Quo, you've got obviously some of the ones you mentioned, you've got Jeff Beck, Love Sculpture was Dave Edmunds, who again, were these, a lot of these groups at the time, and Status Quo the best example, were their live sets were ostensibly blues or blues rock, but the record companies are trying to make them into pop groups. So there was a tug of war, a tussle between the commercial sensibilities of the record companies and the kind of creative aspirations of the groups. And a lot of the groups, they wanted to play this American blues stuff, this really gutsy, deep, they were immersed in this kind of idea of the Delta blues at the time.
So it always amazes me, and I think obviously you mentioned David Wells, the person that compiled it. Do you think he knew all these tracks beforehand, or was it a process of discovery as he went along, finding out?
I don't know if Dave would thank me, but I don't think he's a huge fan of British blues music. He's more a fan of the more colourful songwriting and psychedelic music. But what he has is a fascination with the stories, the kind of the groups that become the sort of the journeyman. That to quote Rod Stewart, every picture tells a story. Each of these groups has this fascinating story, which, the same things happen. Band members leave, record label drops you, or singer leaves, or they record an album that it might take off. Everyone's got this little story to tell. What you do find when you dip into all these records is odd little tracks that are gems. And you think, wow, that album might be really collectible, but let's face it, most of the music isn't brilliant. But maybe it's a bit like a lower league football team. They'll always have one moment in a game which is Premiership level. But it's the consistency. And a lot of these groups are the same. They excel on one or two tracks. What they don't have is the quality control of a Free or a Beatles or a Stones, who are they're the bands who make it, because every track's a winner. So our job is to try to find
those gems,
those key tracks, and also the key rarities. Yeah. So there's a number of tracks that are unissued on here. So just looking at this, so the Zany Woodruff Operation was a band that David tracked down. I think they had a little website, a band that meant nothing at the time, who recorded a version of Crawling Up a Hill, which is the title track, which was famous by John Mayall's Blues Breakers. We've included this unissued version. And there's other unissued tracks on the box set as well, so yeah.
So suddenly, all these years later, certain bands have actually found a degree of fame.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must admit, a lot of the groups are chuffed to bits that they're now immortalised 50 years later.
Yeah.
As part of this story of a little scene that happened and has been long forgotten, really, barring the few big acts, because you'll see articles on John Mayall or Free or whoever at Fleetwood Mac in Mojo, but you won't necessarily hear about Jacqueline, Frozen Tear or Angel Pavement. So it's that mix as ever which you get with the box sets.
So this is another chance to discover some wonderful hidden gems and to hear some great songs also by well-known artists.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, thanks very much, John.
Thank you.